He thought she was just passing through, a woman with a broken-down Mustang and a haunted look in her eyes. He fixed her car, refused her money, and figured he'd never see her again. But what she came back to offer, it wasn't just gratitude, it was a chance to rewrite both their lives. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low like they hadn't made up their mind yet. Jack Cole stood in the kitchen, the faded tiles cool under his bare feet, one hand wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, the other clutching a crumpled envelope. Past due. Again. He'd seen that stamp too many times to flinch anymore, but tonight it pressed heavier on his chest. Outside, the driveway looked like a scrapyard in slow motion. Tools lay scattered around the half-gutted '92 Dodge Dakota he'd been trying to flip for weeks, but no one in this town was buying, not with gas prices climbing and paychecks shrinking. The tarped Camaro beside it hadn't run since before Lily was born. Jack kept telling himself he'd get to it one day. But these days, survival came before nostalgia. From the living room, the faint hum of cartoons broke the silence. Lily was curled up under a blanket, eating dry cereal from a plastic bowl, her eyes glued to the screen like it was the only safe place left in the world. 7 years old, already knowing how to make herself small when her dad was under pressure. Jack hated that. Hated that she could read the air like it owed her something. He set the mug down too hard. The ceramic cracked. Perfect. "Dad?" Lily's voice was soft. Jack wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Yeah, sweetheart? You okay?" He forced a smile she couldn't see. "Yeah, just thinking." She didn't push. Lily never did. That's what worried him most. She'd learned early what not to ask. The fridge hummed, its contents sparse. A half-empty carton of milk, eggs nearing expiration, 3 slices of bread, and a sticky jar of peanut butter that might stretch until Friday. Payday was still 5 days out. He'd already pawned his grandfather's watch last month to cover the electric. There was nothing left to sell. A knock on the door startled him. Jack turned sharply, muscles tensing. No one knocked around here unless they were delivering bad news or asking for money he didn't have. He moved slowly toward the door, every step a reminder of how thin his margins were, financially, emotionally, all of it. And somewhere beneath it all, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to give. The sound came first, a sputter, a cough, then a low mechanical groan like something proud trying not to die. Jack looked up from beneath the rusted hood of the Dakota just as the '67 Mustang rolled into view, its glossy cherry-red body streaked with rain, engine whining like it knew it didn't belong here. It coasted to a stuttering stop right in front of his busted mailbox, the front tire nudging the curb like it had finally given up. He wiped his hands on an oily rag, heart ticking a little faster. That was no ordinary car. That was a piece of history. Even half-choked and wheezing, the Mustang looked like something out of a dream, a relic that didn't belong in this tired, 2-lane town where Fords died quietly in backyard garages and everyone drove something practical. The chrome on that grille alone probably cost more than Jack made in a week. It didn't fit here. Neither did the woman who stepped out of it. She moved like she wasn't used to being still, heels clicking against wet pavement, one hand shielding her eyes from the misty drizzle, the other tapping her phone screen like she expected it to obey her. But the reception out here was spotty at best, and the silence told her the same thing Jack already knew. No signal, no help, no one coming. She turned and caught his eye. Jack nodded once, not moving. He didn't want to startle her. She looked sharp, put together, maybe 30-something, but there was something else, too. Tension around the eyes, a practiced calm stretched just a little too tight. She glanced back at the Mustang, then toward Jack's house, then at him again, weighing her options like a woman not used to needing help. She crossed the road slowly, heels careful on the gravel. Jack noticed her hesitation, the way her shoulders squared just before she spoke. "Do you work on cars?" Jack glanced at the Mustang, then back at her. Depends on the car. She looked over her shoulder, rain beating on the roof of the stalled-out beauty. It's a 67, she said. Started choking outside of town. Thought I could make it to the next gas station. Jack's fingers itched. You won't find one for 12 miles. Silence stretched between them. She sighed. Figures. And just like that, the Mustang wasn't the only thing stranded on his street. Vanessa stepped out of the car like she'd meant to arrive somewhere else. Her heels hit the gravel with a crunch that didn't match the quiet desperation in her eyes. She adjusted the lapels of her blazer, brushed invisible lint from her silk blouse, and tried not to show the panic simmering just beneath the surface. It was the kind of panic you learn to hide when you spend your life around people who think emotion equals weakness. Jack watched her from a few feet away, arms crossed, grease on his forearms, sweat clinging to the collar of his shirt. She looked out of place next to the half-dismantled Dakota in his driveway, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Everything about her, the tailored clothes, the designer bag slung over her shoulder, the low bun too perfect for humidity, screamed one thing: wrong town, wrong road, wrong moment. But it was her eyes that kept him looking, green, clear, and alert. The kind of eyes that cataloged everything and gave away nothing. I'm guessing you're the mechanic, she said, lifting her chin slightly. I'm the guy who works on cars, Jack replied. Mechanic sounds too official. She offered a tight smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. Close enough. Jack gestured toward the Mustang. You drive it like that often? She exhaled, annoyance flickering. It was fine this morning. He crouched near the front wheel, letting his eyes roam over the car's lines. And now it's not. No, it's not, she said, sharper than she meant to. And I've got somewhere to be. Jack didn't flinch. Well, it's not going anywhere unless I get a look under the hood. She hesitated, then nodded and reached through the driver's side window to pop it open. Vanessa, she said, offering her name like a handshake. Jack? He lifted the hood and was immediately greeted with a hiss of steam and the faint smell of burnt rubber. Vanessa stepped closer but stayed out of the splash zone, her arms folded, posture rigid, like being near this kind of mess made her nervous. Looks like your girl here's been running hot for a while, Jack said. She needs more than a Band-Aid. Vanessa let out a breath, part frustration, part surrender. Perfect. But Jack was already digging into his toolbox, sleeves rolled up, jaw set. She was used to control, to ordering solutions with a swipe of her finger. But here, with steam rising and gravel crunching under boots instead of heels, she wasn't in charge. And for the first time in a long while, Vanessa Sinclair didn't know what came next. Jack glanced at the cracked watch on his wrist. The numbers stared back at him like a warning. 3:41 p.m. Lily's school let out at 4 sharp, and it was a 15-minute drive on a good day with no traffic and his truck actually starting on the first try. He cursed under his breath, then looked back at the Mustang, steam still curling from the engine like smoke signals. Vanessa hovered nearby, arms crossed tight over her chest, eyes darting between him and her car like she wasn't sure which one she trusted less. I've got 10 minutes, Jack said, voice gruff, but steady. Might be enough to get her breathing again. Vanessa blinked, surprised. You don't have to... I know, he cut in, already reaching for his socket wrench. But I'm gonna. She hesitated. I can call someone. AAA or... He glanced up, smirking just slightly. Out here? You'll be lucky if someone shows before dark? That shut her up. He worked fast, fingers moving on instinct. Radiator hose was loose. A bad clamp, maybe. She was lucky it hadn't overheated all the way to a blown gasket. He tightened what needed tightening, wiped his hands, then reached into the engine bay like he'd done it 1,000 times. And he had. Not with this kind of machine, maybe, but under pressure with the clock ticking. That was Jack's wheelhouse. Vanessa stood behind him, awkward and still. She kept checking her phone, like a signal might magically appear. It didn't. Try it now, Jack called, stepping back. She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key. The Mustang hesitated for half a second, then growled to life, engine purring like it had just needed to be reminded how to breathe. Vanessa looked up at him, visibly stunned. "You actually fixed it." "Told you I was close enough to a mechanic." She stepped out, reaching into her purse without missing a beat. "Let me pay you, I insist." Jack shook his head, already walking toward his truck. "Don't need it." She blinked, following after him. "At least something for your time." "I'm already late to pick up my kid," he said, opening the driver's side door. "You needed help. I had a wrench. That's the whole story." And with that he slid into the truck, turned the ignition twice, 3 times, until the engine grumbled awake. As he pulled out, he caught a glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, standing there with the envelope still in her hand, lips parted, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. And Jack? He didn't look back. But damn if he didn't feel her watching him the whole way down the street. The Mustang's engine purred like it had been waiting for this moment, for someone to finally treat it right. Vanessa rested one hand on the wheel, but her eyes weren't on the road. They were on him, Jack, now halfway down the driveway, a stubborn streak of grease across his forearm, his boots soaked from standing in puddles. He moved like a man who carried too much and spoke too little. He stopped for a beat before climbing into his truck, glancing back at her, just once. Their eyes locked. It lasted no more than a few seconds, but something shifted in that space, quiet and unseen, like a fault line tremoring beneath their feet. Jack didn't smile, didn't nod. He just looked at her like he saw something he wasn't expecting. Not the heels, not the attitude, not the polished look she wore like armor, but the crack beneath it, the tiredness she thought she had, hidden behind tailored sleeves and lipstick. Vanessa held his gaze. She didn't drop her eyes like she usually did when strangers looked too long. She didn't play polite or professional. She just looked back. There was weight in the silence. His was worn, old, made of long nights and overdue bills and the kind of heartbreak that doesn't announce itself. Hers was different, sharper, newer maybe, but no less heavy. A grief that clung to her posture, to the way her mouth stayed tight, even when the crisis had passed. Neither of them said a word, and then Jack blinked, broke the connection, and turned away. His truck coughed before settling into a grudging rumble, and he backed out onto the road without another glance. Vanessa sat still, her hands trembling slightly on the wheel, breath shallow, like she'd forgotten how to exhale. For a moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she shifted the Mustang into gear. But as she pulled away, something about the sound of his voice, the steadiness of his hands, the fact that he hadn't asked for a damn thing, money, attention, anything, lingered in her mind like a song stuck on a loop. And Jack, as he turned onto the main road, clenched the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, heart thudding with something he didn't dare name. Whatever that was between them, it wasn't nothing. The taillights disappeared down the stretch of road like a quiet goodbye, red smears against the gray sky, until even that glow was swallowed by the mist. Jack sat in the driver's seat of his truck, engine idling low, headlights slicing through the drizzle. For a second, he didn't move, didn't shift into gear, just stared at the spot where the Mustang had been, the gravel still damp from its tires. He didn't even know her name. And that should have been the end of it. Some stranger with a car and a problem, just like 100 other people who'd pulled up needing help and left with nothing more than a thank you. But this time felt different, and Jack didn't like that it did. He rubbed his hands together, trying to shake the chill that had settled in his bones, not from the rain, but from the silence she left behind. He'd expected her to offer money. He didn't expect the look in her eyes when he refused it. It hadn't been offended or annoyed. It had been something else. Like he'd caught her off guard in a way that had nothing to do with the car. He'd seen people wear exhaustion before, but hers wasn't the kind that came from lack of sleep. It was the kind that came from pretending you didn't need anyone. And that hit too close to home. He made it to Lily's school 5 minutes late. She was the last kid sitting on the bench outside the main doors, backpack in her lap, knees swinging. When she saw him, she didn't frown or complain. She just climbed into the truck, quiet as usual, and buckled in. "Sorry, baby girl," Jack said as they pulled away. "It's okay," she murmured. Then, after a pause, "Was that lady okay? The one with the red car?" Jack blinked, surprised. "You saw her?" Lily nodded. "She looked sad." Jack swallowed, staring out at the road ahead. "Yeah," he said softly, "I guess she did." She was gone now, probably halfway to wherever she came from. He'd never see her again. That's what he told himself. But when he walked back into the house later, still smelling like engine heat and rain, the silence felt different. He stood by the window for longer than he meant to, eyes drifting down the empty driveway. She was gone without a name. And yet she hadn't really left. Not entirely. Jack didn't notice the envelope until the next morning. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the air heavy and damp. He was out early, pulling tools from the Dakota, the usual ritual of wiping grease from yesterday's failures and trying to believe today would be better. That's when he saw it, wedged in the corner of the Mustang's back seat, half crumpled, barely visible through the fogged window. The car was gone, of course, but the envelope was not. It had fallen out of Vanessa's purse, maybe, or slipped from wherever she kept her private things. It wasn't addressed. No stamp, no markings, just a weathered manila sleeve with a faint crease down the center, and something, paper, a few pages maybe, tucked inside. Jack turned it over in his hands like it might reveal a clue. It didn't. He set it on the workbench, but it kept catching his eye. Every time he tried to get back to the Dakota's busted timing belt, his gaze drifted back to the envelope. It didn't belong here, just like she didn't, just like that Mustang didn't. None of it made sense, and yet here it was, sitting in the middle of his world, asking for something he didn't know how to give. By noon, he still hadn't opened it. He told himself it wasn't his place. Whatever was in there, it was hers. But the longer he stared at it, the heavier it felt. Not in weight, there was barely anything to it, but in presence, like it had its own gravity. He picked it up again, thumb brushing the edge of the flap. He could open it. One quick tear, and the mystery would be gone. Maybe it was nothing, just notes, receipts, junk mail, but something about the way she'd looked at him yesterday told him this was no accident. She hadn't meant to leave it, but maybe part of her wanted it to be found. He exhaled sharply and set it down again, harder this time. No, not his. But he couldn't throw it away either. So he slid it into the top drawer of the old filing cabinet next to the door, next to faded warranties and unpaid invoices. He closed the drawer with a soft clunk, but the envelope stayed loud in his mind. He didn't know when or if he'd see her again. But now, he had something she'd left behind. And that meant the story wasn't quite over. Not yet. Dinner was quiet except for the scrape of forks and the distant hum of the dishwasher struggling to do its job. Jack sat across from Lily, pushing green beans around his plate while she nibbled on a grilled cheese, legs swinging beneath the table. The living room lights flickered once, just a blink, but long enough to make Jack glance toward the breaker panel like it had personally insulted him, another thing he couldn't afford to fix. Lily chewed slowly, watching him. She didn't speak right away. She never did when something mattered. "Dad?" she said finally, voice soft. "Yeah?" He didn't look up. The lady with the red car, who was she? Jack's fork stopped moving. He glanced at her, then back down. "Just someone passing through. Her car broke down. I fixed it." Lily squinted, unconvinced. "She was pretty." Jack smirked at his plate. "Was she?" "Yeah, like the ladies on the TV shows. But she looked sad." Lily tilted her head, brow furrowed. "Why was she sad?" Jack sighed, leaned back in the chair. "I don't know, baby. Sometimes people carry stuff you can't see. Doesn't always mean they want to talk about it." Lily nodded, absorbing that like she always did. A quiet sponge in a too loud world. "She left something in the car, didn't she?" Jack blinked. "What makes you say that?" "I saw you bring something in from the driveway. You looked at it like it was a secret." He paused, then pushed his plate away. "It's just an envelope. Nothing important." Lily shrugged, unconvinced but unwilling to press. She wasn't nosy, just observant. Too observant sometimes. She saw things Jack didn't want her to, like how his hands trembled after phone calls from the bank, or how he stared at the garage ceiling some nights instead of sleeping. "She gonna come back?" she asked. Jack didn't answer right away. "Probably not," Lily frowned. "I think she will." He looked at her, really looked, this little girl with her mother's eyes and more sense than most adults he knew. Why's that? Because people don't leave stuff behind unless they want a reason to come back. And just like that, she returned to her sandwich like she hadn't just dropped a truth he didn't know how to carry. Jack stared at her, silent, the envelope still locked away in the drawer, burning a little hotter than it had before. The week dragged like wet denim. Jack filled it with busted radiators and oil changes that paid half what they were worth. He kept the envelope sealed in the drawer, but every time he passed it, something in him twitched. Curiosity, guilt, maybe both. Nights were the worst. After Lily fell asleep and the hum of the fridge was the only sound in the house, he'd sit at the table with a cold beer and think about green eyes and silence, heavy with things unsaid. She didn't come back. Not Monday, not Thursday, not even the weekend. He told himself he'd imagined whatever passed between them, that she belonged to a different world and had already forgotten him. Until Tuesday afternoon. He was hunched over the Dakota's engine again, half cursing the rusted bolts and half hoping they gave him a reason to throw a wrench, when the familiar low purr crept into his driveway. He didn't look up at first. Couldn't. He knew that sound. The Mustang wasn't fixed so much as resurrected, and it moved like it knew it. When he finally stood, the sun caught the windshield just right, and there she was. Vanessa stepped out, heels softer this time, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of tied back in a tight bun. She looked different, less polished, maybe, less armored, but her eyes, those were the same, focused, unreadable, burning with intent. Jack didn't move. He wiped his hands on a rag and waited. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. She walked straight up to him and stopped a few feet away, the same way she had last time. But this time, her gaze didn't flick to the car. It stayed on him. "I didn't come back for the car," she said quietly. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think you broke it again." "I came back because I owe you a conversation," she said, her voice low but steady, "and maybe more than that." Jack narrowed his eyes, unsure where this was going. "You drove all the way out here to talk?" Vanessa looked around the driveway, at the tools, the dirt, the life etched into everything he touched. Then her eyes found his again. "No," she said. "I came back to offer you something that might change everything, if you're willing to hear me out." The breeze carried the scent of motor oil and coming rain. Jack didn't answer. Not yet. But he didn't turn away either. Jack stood still, his arms crossed, as Vanessa's words hung in the air between them. The offer, too clean, too polished, felt like a foreign language he'd heard but never learned to speak. He stared at her, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to feel. It was all too much, too fast, and something about it scratched an itch he didn't want to acknowledge. "You're serious?" he asked, the words coming out more hoarse than he intended. Vanessa didn't flinch. She stood taller, eyes locked on his, the weight of her offer settling around them both. "I'm serious. I want you to run a full-service restoration shop. Vintage cars. Your specialty. My specialty. We could turn this into something real. I believe in what you do, Jack. I've seen it in every piece of work you've ever touched." Her words felt too big, too high for someone like him. Jack didn't know how to respond. His hands, still rough with grease from fixing his own broken-down dreams, clenched at his sides. "And you think I'm going to just walk away from this?" He motioned vaguely to the rusting heap of cars and tools strewn across his yard. "For something I can't even see? I don't trust easy promises." Vanessa's gaze softened, just a fraction. She stepped closer, close enough that Jack could smell the faint hint of her perfume, the sharp scent of someone who'd spent the day in meetings, not under cars. "It's not a promise, Jack. It's a chance. A real one. You're stuck here, in this little corner of the world, fixing cars for nothing when you could be building something that matters. You don't have to live like this forever." Her words cut deeper than he wanted to admit. He'd spent his whole life running this garage, fixing broken things, making ends meet one stubborn repair at a time. What was the point of changing now? "You don't get it," he muttered, stepping back, putting distance between them. "I've been working on this place for years. I can't just drop everything and follow some dream you're offering." Vanessa's expression didn't shift. She didn't look like she was trying to convince him anymore. She looked like she was waiting for him to see what she saw. "It's not a handout, Jack," she said, voice steady now. "It's a partnership, a real opportunity, and I'm offering it because I believe you can do something with it." Jack swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing into him, making his chest tight. He didn't trust this, didn't trust her, didn't trust the unknown. But there was a part of him, a small, foolish part, that wanted to take it, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could step into a future that wasn't already written for him. But he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Not today. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice tight, like he was still holding on to something he couldn't quite let go of. Vanessa nodded, her gaze not leaving him. "I'll be here when you're ready." And with that, she turned and walked back to her car, leaving Jack standing in the driveway, caught between a life he knew and a life he was too afraid to chase. The next morning, Jack woke up to a message on his phone, just a brief text from Vanessa. "Meet me at the lot. I want to show you something." The words were simple enough, but the knot in his stomach told him that the easy part of this was over. He left the house with only a grunt of good morning to Lily, who was still buried under the covers, probably dreaming up another day of adventure. The truck felt heavier than usual as he drove, the air thick with the weight of decisions he hadn't made yet. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he was pretty sure he wouldn't like it. When he pulled into the empty lot, the first thing he saw were the blueprints rolled up under Vanessa's arm. She stood next to the faded sign at the corner of the property, her posture still that practiced confidence, but there was something else now, something a little softer, like she was trying to make him understand. She didn't smile when he parked, didn't wave or offer pleasantries. She just handed him the rolled paper. "This is what I've been working on," she said, voice firm, but carrying an edge of uncertainty that Jack hadn't heard before. "I've already secured funding. The place is ours if you want it." He unfurled the blueprint, his eyes scanning the lines. The design was clean, professional, nothing flashy, but there was a space for every tool, every workbench, every car that would roll through. The layout was more than just a shop. It was a future. His future. It was the kind of place he could build something from the ground up, something that could last, something that had his name on it. He felt the sting in his chest, the pull of everything he'd ever wanted. But then the familiar knot twisted. It wasn't that simple. "You've already planned everything," Jack said, his voice lower than he intended. "You've got all this lined up, and you want me to just walk in and take over?" Vanessa stood next to him, not speaking, just letting the silence do its work. She wasn't backing down. She never did. "It's not just a job, Jack," she said after a beat. "This is a chance for you to run something, build something that lasts. I can't do it without you, not the way it needs to be done. I want you to take control of this." He rubbed his hand over his face. The weight of it hit harder than he expected. He had the skills, the drive, the experience, but he had never thought of himself as the kind of man who would run something big, not like this, not in a world where the bills came first, where the struggle to make it was never far behind. "I don't know if I can just leave this," he said, gesturing back at the driveway, the broken-down vehicles that were his day-to-day. "This is what I know." Vanessa didn't flinch. She didn't seem surprised by his hesitation. She'd been waiting for this, Jack could tell. "You won't leave it, Jack. You'll build on it. This place, your work, It's never been just about fixing cars. It's about fixing what's broken, and I'm giving you the chance to do it on your terms." He stared at the blueprint again, trying to imagine it, trying to picture himself in that space. He could see it, his name on the sign, the tools he'd spent a lifetime collecting, the cars he'd finally get to work on without cutting corners, but the fear, the doubt, the weight of what he knew was hard to shake. "And what happens when I screw up?" Jack asked, voice strained. Vanessa didn't blink. "You won't. Not if you care enough to try." He stared at the blueprint for a long time, feeling both the pull of something better and the pressure of everything he had to lose. Somewhere deep inside, he knew she was right. It wasn't about fixing cars anymore. It was about fixing himself. Jack folded the blueprint, staring at it one last time before he handed it back to her. "I'll think about it," he said. Vanessa nodded, but there was something in her eyes, a kind of understanding. "Take your time, Jack, but don't take too long." As he drove home, the blueprint sat heavy on the passenger seat, the weight of what could be, the future waiting, just out of reach. Jack sat in his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might slip away from him. The weight of the blueprint on the passenger seat felt like an anchor, pulling him deeper into uncertainty. Vanessa's offer, the idea of the shop, it felt too big for him, like a life he hadn't earned yet. He had spent so many years in this small corner of the world, fixing rust and broken parts, never thinking there could be more. And now, here she was, offering him a chance at everything, but it didn't sit right. He drove to the diner, the engine humming low under his hands, the world around him blurring with the motion. He needed answers, needed to know why her offer had come when it did, why she had picked him of all people. When he pulled into the parking lot, he saw her standing by the door, waiting. She was calm, collected, everything he wasn't. She didn't look surprised to see him. He guessed she had been waiting for this moment, the one where he finally asked what was really going on beneath the surface. "Can we talk?" he said, stepping out of the truck, his voice rough with more than just the cold. Vanessa's eyes softened, but she didn't respond right away. She just let him inside, the clatter of plates and mugs filling the space between them. She motioned for him to sit, and he did, a heavy silence stretching out before either of them spoke. "You're going to have to stop beating around the bush," Jack finally said, his tone sharp. "Why me? Why now? You're talking like you've got this whole future mapped out, but why me? What makes me so special?" Vanessa took a breath, her eyes dropping to the table for a moment before she looked up again. There was something different in her gaze now, a flicker of something buried deep. For the first time, she wasn't the confident, polished woman who had walked into his driveway with an offer. She was vulnerable, maybe even a little broken. "My father was a mechanic," she said quietly. "He wasn't like you, not with his hands. He ran a shop, hired the best people he could find, made it successful. But he never really saw the value in the work. He never saw the art in it. He thought it was just a way to make money. And he didn't know how to fix what was really broken, Jack. I don't think he ever realized he was broken too." Her voice faltered for a second, but she caught herself. Jack stayed silent, watching her. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected the grief in her words or the way it softened her. She wasn't just a woman with a plan. She was someone who had lost. "I trust you because you remind me of him," Vanessa continued, her voice steady now, though her hands trembled slightly on the edge of the table. "You don't take shortcuts. You care about what you're doing, even when no one's watching. And I know that because I've seen it. I've watched how you work, how you handle the smallest details like they matter. My father never understood that, but you do. You fix things, not just cars, but the things people don't see, the things they think they've lost." Jack's chest tightened. He hadn't expected her to open up like this. He didn't know how to respond. Everything she said, it cut too close to the kind of life he had always tried to avoid. His whole world had been small, controlled, easy to keep from falling apart. Now she was offering him something bigger, something that could change everything. "You trust me because I remind you of him?" Jack said, his voice low, still unsure. "That's all?" Vanessa nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "I trust you because you remind me that some things are worth saving, even when they seem like they're beyond fixing." The words hit harder than he expected, and for the first time Jack realized that maybe she wasn't offering him a job at all. She was offering him a chance to rebuild, not just a garage, but everything that had been lost along the way. But it was a chance that scared him more than he cared to admit. Jack walked into the kitchen, the smell of burnt toast hanging in the air. Lily was already sitting at the table, her school bag slung across the chair next to her, the morning light casting a soft glow over her face. She was quieter than usual, her fingers picking at the edge of a napkin, lost in thought. "Morning, kiddo," Jack said, setting down the coffee mug, trying to hide the weight of the conversation that still hung in his mind. His mind was a blur. Vanessa's offer, the blueprint, the promises of a life bigger than the one he knew. And the hardest part was knowing that all of it was right in front of him, just out of reach. Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him for a moment, her gaze steady and sure in a way that made his chest tighten. "Dad," she finally said, her voice small but filled with something he didn't expect. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" Jack froze. He hadn't meant for her to notice, hadn't meant for her to see it at all. But she always did. Lily had this way of seeing more than any adult gave her credit for. He sat down across from her, rubbing his hands over his face. "What do you mean?" She looked up at him, eyes wide, a little sparkle of excitement in them. "The lady with the red car. You're thinking about her offer, about the garage. You're thinking about taking it, right?" Jack didn't know how to respond. She was too smart for her own good, too aware of things that didn't belong in a kid's world. His first instinct was to downplay it, to tell her that it was just an idea, something that wasn't even real, but he knew that wasn't the truth. "Yeah, I'm thinking about it," he said quietly, his voice unsteady. Lily's face lit up. She threw her arms wide, the excitement filling her like she was about to burst. "You should do it, Dad. You always help people. You fixed so many cars and helped so many people, and you never ask for anything. Maybe it's your turn to be helped." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Lily's belief in him was simple and pure, and it cut deeper than any of the doubts he had. She believed in him when he could barely believe in himself. "Maybe it's time for you to have something good too," Lily said, leaning forward. Her eyes filled with the kind of hope Jack hadn't seen in a long time. Jack swallowed hard, his emotions tightening in his chest. This little girl, with all her innocence and love, was giving him something he didn't think he deserved. But for the first time, it felt like maybe she was right. Maybe he wasn't supposed to do it all alone. Maybe, just maybe, he could let someone else help him. Maybe it was time to stop running from the opportunity he'd spent his whole life too afraid to take. He nodded slowly, his voice thick. "Maybe you're right, kiddo." Jack sat in his truck staring at the empty lot across the street. The same lot Vanessa had shown him the blueprints for. The same lot that could become everything he'd ever dreamed of. But it wasn't just a piece of land to him. It was a leap into the unknown, a risk that felt like it could swallow him whole. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he replayed her words in his mind. It's not just a job, it's a chance to build something real. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that always made Jack's thoughts louder. He had told himself he'd think about it, but thinking was easy. Making a choice? That was different. The truth was, he was scared. Scared of failing. Scared of being too far from his comfort zone. Scared of stepping into a future that didn't feel like his own. But the longer he sat there, the more he realized that his world, the world he'd built piece by piece, with grease and grit, was starting to feel too small. He wasn't the same man who had picked up that first wrench. And Lily, God, Lily had so much more faith in him than he had in himself. Her words echoed in his mind. Maybe it's your turn to be helped. The little girl who'd watched him break his back for years, struggling to make ends meet, believed in him enough to take that leap. And maybe, just maybe, He had to believe in himself, too. He turned the key, the truck starting with a familiar rumble, and drove across the street to the site. His heart pounded louder with every inch closer. The lot was nothing more than dirt and broken pavement right now, the old chain-link fence sagging at the corners. But he could see it, even if he wasn't ready to admit it, what it could be, what it would become. His hands, stained with oil and years of labor, clenched around the wheel as he parked, the sound of gravel crunching under the tires too loud in the silence. Vanessa was already there, standing by the makeshift sign that marked the property. She looked up when he pulled in, no surprise in her eyes. She was patient, waiting for him to make the move she knew was coming. Jack stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached her. His chest felt tight, like there was too much air in his lungs. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to take the first step into something that felt so big. "So, you want me to take a look?" he asked, his voice rough, like it had been too long since he'd spoken with real conviction. Vanessa nodded, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Yeah, I do. I think you'll see it too." He hesitated, his gaze drifting over the space. The blueprints, the plans, everything she'd promised, it was right there in front of him. He let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "All right, I'll take a look." For the first time he felt something stir, something other than fear, something that might have been hope. The lot was quieter than Jack expected. The hum of traffic from the nearby street faded behind the rusted chain-link fence, leaving only the sound of wind moving through the grass and the occasional scrape of dry branches against the cracked pavement. It was nothing but open space and dirt, just a canvas waiting for something to be painted onto it. But Jack could already see it, the building, the lifts, the rows of cars waiting to be restored. Vanessa stood beside him, arms crossed, watching him as he took it all in. She didn't speak, letting him process the way the place felt. Empty, sure, but full of possibility. It felt bigger than anything Jack had ever done before, bigger than he ever thought he could handle. But with each breath he took, the doubt crept further into his mind. He wasn't sure how to start. He wasn't sure where to begin. He turned to her. "You've got a lot of faith in me, don't you?" Vanessa's eyes didn't leave the lot, but he saw her smile out of the corner of his eye. "I don't think you realize how much you've already done," she said quietly. "This place, this could be everything you've wanted. It could be everything you've been holding back from." Jack felt his chest tighten at her words, his breath catching for a moment. He'd spent so many years fixing other people's broken things, bending his back over tasks that barely kept his family afloat. And now she was standing here, telling him that all of it could lead to this. A place with his name on it, where the cars weren't just things to be worked on, but pieces of something bigger. He had been too afraid to even dream of it. He took a few steps forward, eyes scanning the empty lot. "It's a hell of a project," he said, the words heavy in his mouth. "I don't know if I'm the right guy for this." Vanessa took a few steps beside him, her voice soft. "I don't think you need to be the right guy. I think you're the only guy who can do it." She looked at him then, her gaze steady. "You've been fixing things for years, Jack, fixing cars, fixing people's lives, keeping everything together. But now it's time to fix something for yourself." Jack's throat tightened at her words. He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a slow breath. She was right, and that was the part that scared him the most. This was his chance to finally take something he'd spent his life building and make it his own. The thought felt too big, too impossible. But as he stood there in the quiet of the empty lot, something inside of him stirred. It was faint at first, like a whisper, but it grew louder, a steady pulse that echoed the rhythm of his heart. Maybe he didn't know all the steps to get there. Maybe he didn't have all the answers, but he knew he wanted to try. For once, he wasn't just fixing cars, he was building something that mattered, something that could last. He turned to Vanessa, his voice firmer now. "All right, let's do it." The sun was low in the sky, casting a soft golden light across the lot. Jack stood at the far edge, his boots grinding into the gravel, his hands buried in his jacket pockets as he watched Vanessa walk slowly toward him. She had the envelope in her hands again, the one that had been tucked away in the back seat of her Mustang. Jack hadn't thought much of it when he first found it. A stray letter, maybe something insignificant? But the longer he'd held on to it, the more it seemed to pull at him, like it was part of something bigger, something he wasn't seeing yet. Vanessa stopped a few feet away, her eyes fixed on the envelope like it held a piece of her she wasn't ready to share. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she stared down at the letter for a long moment, fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the folds of the paper. "Do you ever feel like there's something in your past that you can never quite shake off?" she asked, her voice low, a quiet vulnerability threading through the words. Jack didn't answer immediately. He just watched her, feeling the weight of her words settle between them. She wasn't just talking about the lot anymore. She wasn't just talking about cars. She was talking about herself, about the things she carried with her, the things she didn't let anyone see. Vanessa exhaled, her eyes still on the letter. "My brother was a lot like you, a car enthusiast. He could rebuild anything, loved getting his hands dirty. We grew up in this world of engines and machines, and he was the one who always believed that it was more than just fixing things. He believed that it was about giving things new life, about seeing the potential in the broken parts." She finally looked up at him, her gaze piercing, like she was searching for something in his eyes. "That letter was from him, the one you found in the Mustang." Jack didn't say anything. He could feel the tension in the air, the heaviness of her words settling over him like a blanket he didn't want to feel. She was opening up, showing him something that had been hidden for a long time. And part of him wanted to pull away, to tell her that he wasn't ready to carry that burden for her. "He passed away a few years ago," Vanessa continued, her voice shaking now. "And that letter was the last thing he ever wrote to me. He was supposed to come home that weekend, but he never made it." The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Jack could feel the weight of her grief, the pieces of her past that she'd kept buried for so long. He didn't know what to say. He didn't have the right words. But he knew in that moment that he wasn't just holding a letter. He was holding the remnants of a life she'd lost, of a part of her that was still alive, even if it wasn't physically there anymore. He reached out and took the letter from her hands, his fingers brushing hers, and he didn't know why, but something inside of him ached to give it back. He didn't need to know the details. He didn't need to understand everything. But he could see it, the love, the loss, the weight of everything she carried, and in that moment it felt like the only thing that mattered was giving her back the part of her past that she'd left behind. "I'm sorry," Jack said, his voice rough, "but you need this more than I do." He handed it back to her, their fingers lingering for a brief moment, and when she looked up at him, there was something different in her eyes, something softer. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just held the letter, the weight of her brother's words, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't seem so alone. Vanessa stood there for a long time after Jack handed her the letter, her fingers still wrapped around the paper, as though it could somehow hold all the pieces of her past together. Jack didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. But he could feel the shift in the air, the quiet sadness that clung to her like a second skin. She finally exhaled, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on her chest. The quiet lingered between them, thick and uncomfortable, until Vanessa took a slow step forward. "Do you remember when you said the Mustang didn't belong here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as though speaking louder might make it too real. She didn't wait for him to answer. "It was my brother's." She let the words fall between them, each one heavy with more meaning than she could explain. "He built it from the ground up, every detail, every part." Jack felt his chest tighten at the way she said it, like the Mustang was more than just a car, like it was a living, breathing thing that carried all of her brother's spirit inside it. "He was obsessed with it," Vanessa continued, her voice thick now, raw. It was the one thing he loved more than anything or anyone. It was his way of proving something. I never really understood it, but when he died—" Her voice faltered, and she looked down at the letter again, her fingers trembling as she folded it carefully. Jack's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice, the way she was unraveling right in front of him, revealing pieces of herself she hadn't shared with anyone before. "The Mustang was in the accident with him," she said, her words jagged now, like they were clawing their way out. "He never made it out, neither did the car. It was wrecked beyond repair." She paused, the silence stretching between them, as she gathered herself. "But when I saw it for the first time again, after all these years, something about it, I couldn't let it go. Not because of the car itself, but because it's the last thing he touched, the last thing he left behind." Jack didn't know what to say. He couldn't imagine losing someone like that, someone who had been such a part of her life, someone whose presence still lingered in the smallest of things. He watched as she stood there, her eyes distant, her expression clouded with memories of a time that felt like it had been too long ago, yet still so close. "I don't want to fix it, Jack," Vanessa said suddenly, her voice raw. "Not the way you might think. I don't want to make it like new. I just need it to live again, you know? Like it matters, like he mattered." Jack's throat went dry, and he felt the weight of her words sink into him. He could see it now. The Mustang wasn't just a car. It was a bridge to her brother, a connection to the past that she couldn't let go of. It was the only piece of him that had survived, and that was more than enough reason to keep it alive. "I get it," Jack said, his voice thick with understanding. "I get why you don't want to let go of it." Vanessa finally looked up at him, her eyes wet but steady. She nodded slowly, the weight of everything she had said settling into the space between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. But Jack knew one thing. He wasn't just fixing a car anymore. He was fixing a part of her, something that had been broken long before he ever met her. And maybe, just maybe, he was fixing himself too. The sketches started with just a few lines, simple, tentative strokes on the scrap paper that Jack always kept by his workbench. But as the days passed, they grew bolder, more detailed, as if the design itself was taking shape, pushing him forward, whether he was ready or not. Jack hadn't planned on working on the shop. He hadn't planned on any of it. But now, sitting at the same desk where he had spent so many nights fixing other people's cars, he was sketching something that could be his, something that could change everything. He had always been good with his hands, fixing broken engines, mending things that didn't work anymore. But this was different. This wasn't just about a car or a garage. This was about rebuilding his life, about giving himself something real for once. He leaned in, focused on the lines he was drawing, but the quiet hum in the background, the sound of the door opening and closing, kept pulling his attention. Vanessa had started showing up more often. At first it was just to drop off paperwork or discuss the next steps, but now she seemed to just be there, watching him. It wasn't uncomfortable. No, it was something else entirely. She wasn't hovering, wasn't rushing him. She was simply present, like a quiet force in the background. One afternoon she stood in the doorway of the garage, arms crossed, watching as Jack meticulously added another curve to the design. He didn't notice her at first, too focused on the way the angles fit together, too immersed in the world he was trying to build. When he finally looked up, she was standing there, her eyes soft, not with expectation, but with something else. Admiration, maybe. Hope. "You're really doing it," she said, her voice quiet but full of meaning. Jack didn't respond right away. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hand over his face, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling in. "I guess I am." Vanessa smiled, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I always knew you could." There was a softness in her voice, a trust he hadn't heard before. And for the first time in days, Jack didn't feel like he was pretending, He wasn't faking his way through this anymore. He was building something, something that mattered. And it wasn't just for him. It was for her too. It was for the future they both had yet to see. Over the next few weeks she showed up even more, just to watch, to observe, her presence filling the space without making it feel crowded. Jack didn't mind. It wasn't the same as before. She wasn't there to dictate the pace or the direction. She was just there, smiling at the little victories, celebrating when a new piece of equipment arrived or when the first beam of the new structure was set in place. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, she walked over to his workbench, a small bottle of water in her hand, and set it down beside him. "Looks good," she said, nodding at the plan spread out before him. "It's coming together." Jack glanced up, surprised by the genuine warmth in her voice. "Yeah," he said, his voice a little rough. "I think it is." She stayed silent for a moment, just looking at him, her gaze lingering longer than usual. "You know, I'm glad you're doing this. I think this place, it's going to mean something. To both of us." Jack didn't know what to say to that, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of uncertainty bearing down on him. Maybe this wasn't just about the cars. Maybe it wasn't just about the shop. Maybe it was about something else, something bigger. The sound of the pencil scratching against paper was the only noise in the room as Jack went back to work, but this time the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. The plans were coming together, but it wasn't just the designs that were taking shape. It was him. The evenings grew longer, and with them, so did the hours Jack spent at the site, piecing together the parts of the shop that were finally starting to take shape. The plans were coming to life, slowly but surely. But what Jack didn't expect, what he hadn't counted on, was the way Vanessa had started to show up more often. Not just for the work, but to stay. At first it was small things. A quick check-in after the workday, a casual, "How's it going?" But then the checks grew longer, the conversations more drawn out, until one evening, after everyone else had gone home, it was just the two of them, standing in the center of the nearly completed garage, bathed in the soft glow of the overhead lights. Vanessa leaned against one of the steel beams, arms crossed, watching Jack sort through paperwork. She wasn't talking shop anymore. She was watching him, waiting for him to break the silence. "What's wrong?" she asked finally, her voice softer than usual. There was something in her gaze, an invitation to open up, that Jack had never been able to resist. He stopped what he was doing, staring at the papers in front of him like they held the answers to questions he wasn't sure he was ready to ask. After a long pause, he looked up at her, his eyes tired, the weight of too many years of silence pressing down on him. "Lily's mom," he started, his voice rough, as though the words were too heavy to say. He took a breath, trying to steady himself. "She left when Lily was just a baby, packed up and walked out one morning and didn't come back. No note, no explanation, just gone." Vanessa stayed quiet, but her expression softened, her eyes never leaving him. She didn't push, didn't interrupt. She just listened, letting the words spill out of him like the dam had finally broken. "I never thought I'd be the one to raise her alone, never thought I'd be the one making her breakfast every morning or picking her up from school." His voice caught for a moment and he swallowed hard, looking away. "But here we are." There was a silence between them, thick with unspoken words. Vanessa took a step forward, crossing the room slowly, and stood beside him, her gaze steady. "You're doing a hell of a job, Jack," she said quietly, her voice almost like a whisper. "Lily's lucky to have you." Jack let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Lucky? She didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for it." Vanessa's hand rested briefly on his shoulder, the gesture light but sincere. "You're doing the best you can. That's all you can do." Jack glanced at her, his eyes softening for just a moment. "I don't know if I believe that." Vanessa didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped back, her eyes still on him, searching, as if weighing something in her mind. After a long pause, she spoke again, quieter this time. "You don't have to do everything on your own, you know. Not with this. Not with her." Jack looked up at her then, surprised by the weight of her words. There was a softness in her gaze now, something that had shifted between them in the quiet of the room. He wanted to say something, wanted to respond, but he didn't know how. He'd never been good at letting anyone in, never been able to trust anyone with the pieces of himself he kept hidden. But Vanessa wasn't just a business partner anymore. She wasn't just someone who showed up when there was work to be done. She was something else entirely, something Jack couldn't name. As the evening stretched on and the last of the workers filtered out, Jack found himself staying longer, not because the work was done, but because he didn't want to be alone anymore. And when Vanessa stayed, when she lingered a little longer after the meetings, Jack found that he didn't mind at all. They weren't just building a garage anymore. They were building something else too, something Jack hadn't expected, something that felt both terrifying and necessary. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't so afraid to see what came next. The air was heavy with the kind of silence that only came after hours of hard work, the soft hum of the lights above cutting through the stillness of the half-finished shop. The last of the equipment had been moved into place, the space slowly taking form. But the real work, what Jack hadn't anticipated, was the way it felt when the two of them were alone in this space, surrounded by the ghosts of their own unspoken words. Vanessa was wiping her hands on a rag, leaning against the edge of a workbench, her eyes following Jack as he paced across the room, lost in thought. He hadn't meant to fall into this rhythm with her. He hadn't meant for anything to shift. But the truth was, he'd been living in a fog for so long, keeping himself buried in tasks, in routines, in the comfort of control, that now, with the walls coming down, with the space taking shape, he could feel it, the pull, the weight of what was between them. Something more than partnership, something more than the quiet trust that had been building over the past few weeks. He stopped moving, running a hand through his hair, his eyes locking onto hers across the room. There was something different about tonight, something electric in the air. She had this look in her eyes, soft and steady, watching him like she wasn't sure how far he was willing to let things go. Jack shifted on his feet, and Vanessa pushed off the workbench, taking a few slow steps toward him, her gaze never leaving his. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, not now. Not when his life had been nothing but a series of repairs, of fixing what was broken, and never letting anything get too close. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready for her. When she reached him, she didn't speak, just stood there, close enough that he could feel her breath on his skin. Her eyes were searching, waiting for him to make a move, to bridge the distance between them that had always been there. But Jack, for all his instincts, for all his longing, froze. He didn't move, didn't lean in, didn't let himself feel what was coursing through him. He could smell the faint hint of her perfume, feel the warmth of her body, and it made his chest tighten. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready to let someone in again, to open up to the possibility of losing everything he had just started to build. Vanessa took a small step forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Jack." Her hand brushed his arm, the touch light but electric. "It's okay." His throat was dry. The words didn't come. Instead, he pulled away, just enough to break the connection, to put some distance between them. The pain in his chest was sharp, like his body was betraying him, like everything he wanted was just out of reach. He couldn't do this. Not now. Not like this. "I can't," Jack said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. "I can't do this." Vanessa didn't push. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just stood there, her face a mixture of understanding and something else, something more vulnerable that he wasn't ready to face. "It's all right," she said finally, her voice soft, soothing, like she wasn't angry, like she wasn't disappointed. "I'm not going anywhere." But Jack felt the weight of it anyway, the ache of something that could have been and wasn't. He turned away, looking at the walls of the shop, at the plans they had made, the work that still needed to be done. There were so many things he wasn't ready to face, so many pieces of himself He'd kept locked away for so long that he didn't know how to let them out. And the one thing that felt like it could shatter everything, everything he'd worked for, was the one thing he couldn't reach. He didn't turn back to her. He didn't say anything else. He just let the silence fall between them, thick and heavy. As he turned to walk out of the room, the morning came like every other, quiet, steady, with the scent of fresh coffee hanging in the air. Jack had been up early, checking the progress on the site, the sound of his boots crunching against the gravel, as he moved from one corner to the other, trying to keep his focus. The shop was starting to look like something. The walls were going up, the frames were set, and he could almost see the vision coming together. But today felt different. The air was heavier, as if it knew something Jack didn't. He glanced toward the gate, half expecting to see Vanessa's truck pull in, the same as it always had. She'd been there every day for weeks now, quietly watching the process, offering suggestions when needed, and staying just long enough to remind him that this project, this chance, wasn't just a dream. She'd been a constant, an anchor he hadn't realized he needed. But today, the gate stayed empty. The sound of gravel crunching under tires didn't fill the silence. Jack told himself it didn't matter. He had work to do. He was here to finish the job, to make this place real. But his eyes kept drifting to the empty gate, his thoughts trailing off in ways he didn't want to acknowledge. She was always on time, always present. So why wasn't she here? By mid-morning, his patience wore thin. He called her phone, the sound of it ringing too loud in his ear. No answer. He left a message. Nothing. By the time the sun was high in the sky, Jack felt his frustration growing. He tried to focus on the work, screwing in the last of the brackets, measuring the beams, but his mind kept drifting. It was like a weight in his chest, a gnawing feeling that wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right. He wiped his hands on his jeans, taking a long breath, as he leaned against the frame of the building, the sun beating down on him. There was a bitter taste in his mouth, a mixture of confusion and concern. She had always been there, always been a part of this process, and now she wasn't. And Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an off day. Maybe she had found something else. Maybe the offer, the shop, it wasn't enough for her. He didn't know. What he did know was that he couldn't get his mind off of it, couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. He tried to go back to the work, tried to drown out the questions in his head with the sound of his hammer hitting nails, the steady rhythm of construction. But all he could think about was the empty gate, the silence she left behind. By the time the sun started to dip low in the sky, Jack was still there, working, no longer with the urgency of someone driven, but with the restless energy of someone who couldn't stop thinking, couldn't shake the sense of loss that he hadn't expected to feel. Vanessa didn't show up, and Jack couldn't help but wonder if he'd ever see her again. Jack stood by the workbench, the cool metal of his tools pressing into his palms as he tried to focus. He had been working non-stop, his hands rough with the kind of tiredness that settled deep into the bones. The site was almost there, the garage slowly taking shape, and he could almost see it in his mind. The place where everything would finally click, where it would all come together. But the nagging feeling in his chest hadn't gone away. The absence of Vanessa was more than just the empty space where her truck used to be parked. It was the silence between them, the unanswered calls, the way things had felt off. She hadn't shown up in days, and now, with the sun beginning to dip behind the unfinished walls of the shop, Jack felt a cold knot forming deep inside him. He wasn't prepared for what happened next. The phone call came at a time when he least expected it, when the day had dragged on far too long, and he thought maybe, just maybe, he'd get some clarity. "Jack?" Vanessa's voice was strained, quieter than usual. "I need you to sit down. I've got something to tell you." His stomach dropped. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice already tight with a feeling he couldn't shake. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, The words came out slowly, carefully, like she was walking through a minefield. "My board, they're pressuring me to cancel the project." Her voice cracked, just slightly, and Jack felt the sting of it all. "They're saying it's not profitable. They think it's too risky, too expensive for what we can realistically make. They don't believe in it." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. The words felt like a punch to the gut, each one heavier than the last. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. He felt his pulse in his throat, a mix of anger and disbelief rising up. "So that's it? After everything we've put in, everything I've done, now they're pulling the plug." Vanessa exhaled sharply, and Jack could hear the weight in her breath. "It's not that simple, Jack. I fought for this. I thought we could make it work, but they're not seeing it the way I do. They don't see what we could build here." "So you're just going to give up?" His voice rose, anger fueling his words. "You're going to let them tear this down without even trying?" "I don't have a choice," Vanessa said softly, the weight of resignation heavy in her words. "They're the ones who hold the purse strings. They're the ones who control the future of this company. I can't do this without their support. You have to understand." Jack felt the anger flood his veins, the sense of betrayal tightening his chest. All those late nights, the effort, the hope, the sweat, it had all felt real. But now it felt like it was slipping through his fingers. The dream that had started to take shape in his mind, of a place where he could build something, where they could build something together, was being ripped away. "I don't know what to say," he said, his voice low, the weight of his words pulling him under. "I thought we were in this together." "We are," Vanessa said quickly, but there was no conviction in her voice. "But sometimes there's nothing we can do when the people with the power don't believe in it." Jack swallowed the bitter taste that had settled in his mouth. He wanted to argue, wanted to scream that this wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet, that this was about something real. But the truth hit him harder than he expected. Vanessa was out of options. She was just as trapped as he was. "I'll keep fighting for it," she said, the words half-hearted, the promise barely hanging on. "But I don't know how much longer I can." The line went silent, and Jack felt the weight of it all pressing down on him, suffocating him. The project, the dream, it was all on the verge of slipping away. And for the first time, Jack wasn't sure if it was worth the fight. The drive to the city felt like a blur. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the leather. He wasn't sure what he expected when he got there, but the weight of it all, the months of building, the hope, the work, was pulling him forward step by reluctant step. Vanessa's words had lingered in his mind since their phone call, each one harder to shake than the last. "They're pressuring me to cancel the project. It's not profitable. It's too risky." He hadn't wanted to believe it. He didn't know if he could. But now, as the city skyline came into view, the chaos of traffic around him, Jack felt the edge of something else, something sharper than the disappointment, something like resolve. He didn't know if he could change her mind, if he could make a difference at all. But he was done being afraid, done with letting fear hold him back. When he parked and stepped out of the truck, the city felt foreign to him, too big, too loud. He hadn't been here in months, maybe longer. The glass towers reflected the gray sky like cold, impersonal mirrors. His boots clicked sharply against the pavement as he moved toward the entrance of the building, past security, up the elevator. By the time he reached her floor, his heart was pounding, each beat louder than the last. He stepped out of the elevator, his eyes scanning the polished floors, the walls lined with sleek, sterile art. Her office was at the end of the hall, the door wide open. She was sitting at her desk, the quiet hum of the city filtering in through the windows, her gaze fixed on her screen. For a moment, Jack just stood there, watching her. She looked the same as always, composed, controlled, the picture of someone who had it all figured out. But there was a flicker in her eyes when she looked up, just a slight hesitation before she forced a smile. "Jack," she said, her voice softer than he expected. "I didn't think you'd show up." "I almost didn't," Jack said, his voice tight with the words he hadn't been able to say until now. "But I'm done waiting for you to make a decision. I'm done with being scared. I'm done letting you do all the heavy lifting." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, a quiet surprise crossing her face. "What do you mean?" He walked closer, his steps measured, steady. "I mean, I've been sitting around waiting for someone to tell me what to do, waiting for you to make this easy. But nothing's easy, is it? You've been fighting this battle alone for too long." Her eyes softened, but she didn't say anything. She just sat there, her fingers tapping lightly against her desk, waiting for him to continue. Jack leaned against the edge of her desk, his hands shoved into his pockets, his gaze fixed on hers. "I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid to walk away from this, and I'm not afraid to fight for it. But are you?" The words hit the air between them like a challenge, a dare. He didn't know what had come over him. Maybe it was the frustration that had built up over months, or the realization that he couldn't keep hiding behind other people's decisions. But for the first time, he felt something shift in him, something that pushed him forward instead of holding him back. Vanessa sat still, her gaze locked on him. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. It was as if she was seeing him for the first time, as if the weight of his words were just beginning to sink in. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. "I've been fighting this battle alone, but I never thought you'd be the one to step up." Jack's heart beat faster, but his voice remained steady. "I'm stepping up because I believe in this. I believe in us." The silence between them felt like it stretched for an eternity, thick and heavy with unspoken things. But for the first time, Jack didn't mind, because this time, he wasn't afraid to stand his ground. Jack sat across from Vanessa, the silence between them stretching long and heavy. The glass of water she had poured earlier sat untouched on her desk, the faint clink of ice cubes the only sound in the otherwise still room. She wasn't looking at him now. Her gaze was trained on something beyond him, something far away, as if she were lost in her own thoughts, trying to make sense of something too big for words. Jack's throat tightened as the weight of her silence pressed down on him. There was so much left unsaid, so many pieces of this puzzle that didn't fit together, and he didn't know how to make it work anymore. She had been distant, and he could feel it. The walls she had built between them were becoming thicker with each passing day. When she finally spoke, her voice was strained, her words barely a whisper, like she wasn't sure she wanted to say them at all. "I didn't just offer you a job, Jack." He froze. The words hit harder than he expected, a weight settling deep in his chest. "What do you mean?" Her eyes flicked up to meet his, and there was something raw in her gaze, something fragile. "I offered you a way out." Jack's stomach dropped. He shook his head, confused. "A way out of what?" Vanessa exhaled slowly, the air between them thick with something Jack couldn't name. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk, her hands pressed together in front of her, like she was trying to hold herself together. "You think this is just about a business venture? About the garage?" "It's not, Jack." Her voice broke on the last word, a tremor running through her that she couldn't hide. "I needed this. I needed to prove that I could fix something, that I could fix me. And I thought maybe I could help you too. But I see now, maybe I was wrong." Jack's breath hitched as he absorbed her words. The tension in his chest deepened, and he felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He hadn't realized how much she had been carrying, how much of herself she had wrapped up in this project. He had thought it was just about the business, just about the work, but now he saw the cracks, the hurt beneath the surface that she had been hiding. "I thought I was helping you," Vanessa said, her voice breaking. She wiped her eyes, quickly trying to push back the tears that threatened to fall. "But you were the one who helped me. You were the one who believed in me. When I was ready to walk away, when I was ready to let everything fall apart, you were the one who stood by me." Jack didn't know what to say. His heart felt heavy, as if it was being pulled in two different directions. He had never realized the weight of what Vanessa had been carrying, how much she had needed this, how much She had needed him. "Vanessa," he started, his voice shaky. "I didn't know." She looked at him, her eyes searching his, her vulnerability laid bare. "I offered you a way out because you gave me one first. You were the one who made me believe that I could do this, that I could move on from what happened, that I could keep going. I thought if I gave you something, if I helped you, maybe I could finally help myself." The silence stretched between them again, but this time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a turning point, like something had shifted, like they were finally facing the truth of what had been building between them all along. Jack sat back in his chair, the weight of her words settling deep inside him. He had always thought of this project as just a way out for himself, something to build, something to fix, but now he saw it clearer than ever. It wasn't just about the garage, it was about healing, for both of them. "Maybe we can fix this together," Jack said softly, his voice steady. And for the first time in a long time he believed it. The morning was cool, the kind of quiet that only came after a long night of rain. Jack stood in the driveway, his boots crunching against the gravel, as he stared at the heap of metal that had sat there for far too long. It had always been there, tucked under a tarp that had weathered more storms than he cared to remember. The sight of it stirred something in him, something deeper than just the work, something heavier that settled in his chest. Vanessa stood a few steps behind him, her hands stuffed in her jacket pockets, watching him. The same quiet energy that had been between them for months now hung in the air, both of them knowing what needed to happen but not quite ready to speak it. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans, the tension in his shoulders evident as he reached for the corner of the tarp. His fingers hesitated for a moment, the weight of what this meant pressing down on him. It wasn't just a car. It was the first piece of something bigger, something that could finally be his, something that could finally be theirs. With a sharp tug, the tarp was thrown back, revealing the old Mustang beneath, the car that had brought them here, that had been part of everything, Vanessa's brother, her past, and now, their future. It sat there, weathered and worn, but Jack could see past the rust, past the damage. He could see what it could become, what it had the potential to be. Vanessa stepped forward, her breath catching as she took in the sight of it. Her eyes lingered on the car, a quiet sorrow in them as she stepped closer. "It doesn't look like much," she said softly, her voice a mix of hope and regret. Jack nodded, his hands resting on the edge of the car's hood. "It's not much now," he said, his voice steady, but there was something there, something real that he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. "But it will be. This is where we start." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the city, the faint rustle of the wind through the trees. They were standing on the edge of something, something that was so much more than just this car, this shop. It was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild what had been lost, to create something from the wreckage of their pasts. Vanessa's gaze softened as she took a step closer, her eyes flicking from the car to Jack. "You really think we can do this?" she asked, her voice small but full of meaning. Jack's smile was slow, the weight of everything they had gone through together finally lifting, replaced by something lighter, something like hope. "I know we can." He took a deep breath and began to work, the sound of tools clinking together, the sound of something real starting to take shape. It wasn't just about the car. It was about them. It was about rebuilding something together, about taking the broken pieces of their lives and turning them into something they could finally call their own. As Jack worked, Vanessa watched him, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her lips. She had given him a chance, and now he was giving her one too. Together, they would fix more than just the car. They would fix what was broken inside of them piece by piece. And this time, it felt like they were ready. The morning of the grand opening was crisp, the kind of early autumn air that carried a promise of change. Jack stood in the doorway of the new shop, his hands buried in his pockets, watching the small crowd begin to gather outside. The sign above the door, Cole and Sinclair Restorations, hung proudly, the letters still gleaming in the light. It had been months of hard work, late nights, and compromises, but it was finally real. The place was his, theirs, and the truth of it felt like a weight and a blessing all at once. People were starting to trickle in from the town, neighbors, old friends, even a few strangers curious about the new business. The usual hum of the small town seemed quieter now, as if they all held their breath together. He saw familiar faces, people he'd known for years, giving him smiles and nods of approval. But even in the midst of the celebration, Jack felt a hollow space, a weight he wasn't sure how to shake. It was the same feeling he had when he'd first opened the garage doors. The excitement was there, but so was the fear of whether it would last, whether he was really good enough to make it work. Lily was standing beside him, bouncing on the balls of her feet, her eyes wide with excitement. She had been talking about this day for weeks, but now that it was here, she was still trying to wrap her mind around the idea that her dad had done it. He had built something. For her. For them. Jack glanced down at her, and she beamed up at him, a grin so wide it seemed to split her face. She was holding a large pair of scissors in her small hands, ready to cut the ribbon. He knelt down beside her, the warmth of her hand in his, and they shared a quiet moment before the crowd. "Ready?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Lily nodded enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling. "I've been ready all week, Dad." Jack chuckled softly, the sound of it unfamiliar after so many months of silence and hard work. He wasn't used to this feeling, this lightness, this peace. He stepped back as Lily stepped forward, holding the ribbon taut across the wide entrance. She smiled up at him, her fingers trembling slightly as she raised the scissors. The crowd held its breath, and Jack felt every second of it. With a quick snip, the ribbon was severed, and the crowd erupted into applause. Jack stood there, watching Lily's face light up with pride, with pure joy. She had been with him through all of it, the long nights, the endless days, and now she was the one leading the charge into the future. Jack took a slow breath, the weight in his chest finally starting to lift. This was it. This was real. The shop wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a place, a future, a home. He felt Vanessa's presence beside him, a soft, reassuring touch on his arm, her smile matching the warmth in his chest. The crowd began to move into the shop, chatting and laughing, the small town finally buzzing with the promise of something new. Jack stood back, watching it all unfold, feeling the shift in the air. The doors of the shop were open wide, and so was his heart. Everything he had built, everything he had fought for, was here. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The Mustang sat in the middle of the shop, the last layer of polish still glinting on its freshly restored surface. Jack stood back, his hands coated in a mixture of grease and sweat, his eyes running over the car one last time. It had taken months, longer than either of them had planned, but it was finally finished. The body gleamed in the soft light, the engine hummed with life under the hood, the wheels ready to take on the road again. It wasn't just fixed, it was alive. Vanessa stood just behind him, her arms folded across her chest, her gaze flickering from the car to Jack. She hadn't said much as he worked, but her presence had been constant. She was always there, watching, waiting. And now, as he took a step back, he could see the pride in her eyes, the relief that the dream they had started so long ago had finally come to fruition. "Looks good," she said, her voice low, as though she were trying to make sense of everything that had led them to this moment. "Better than I could have imagined." Jack met her eyes, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He wasn't used to compliments, not from her, not from anyone. But it felt different now, like everything had shifted. He wasn't just the guy fixing cars anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that had come to life, both in the shop and in his own heart. Vanessa stepped forward, her hand lightly brushing the side of the Mustang, Her fingers tracing the curves of the door, she looked at him, her expression softening, the weight of the past few months lingering in her gaze. "You did this," she said, and there was a depth to her words, a quiet reverence that made Jack's chest tighten. He nodded, but the words stuck in his throat. "It's not just me," he said, his voice rough. "We did this." Vanessa didn't respond right away. She just walked around the car, running her fingers over the sleek finish, the quiet reverence in her movements betraying the significance of what they had accomplished together. Finally, she stopped at the driver's side, her hand resting on the door. "You ready for one last ride?" she asked, her eyes locking with his. Jack hesitated, his mind racing with a dozen different thoughts, none of them making it past the heavy silence between them. He hadn't planned on this, hadn't expected this moment, this feeling. But now, standing in front of her, the car that had started it all, he realized that it wasn't just the Mustang that had come back to life. It was him too. He swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah, let's go." She smiled then, a smile that was full of everything he had hoped for, relief, joy, and something else, something deeper. Vanessa slid into the driver's seat, her hands adjusting the wheel, the engine rumbling to life as she turned the key. The car rolled smoothly out of the shop, the soft hum of the engine filling the space as they drove down the street. Jack looked out the window, his gaze drifting over the familiar streets of the town, the places that had always felt too small, too limiting. But now, with the open road ahead of him, he realized that everything had changed. The shop, the Mustang, his life. None of it had been about fixing things. It had been about finding himself again, finding a way back to something he thought he had lost forever. Vanessa's eyes were on the road, but Jack could see the smile playing at the corners of her lips, the way she relaxed into the drive. "It's not just fixed," she said quietly, her voice full of meaning. "It's alive again." Jack felt the weight of her words settle into his chest, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself believe it. He wasn't just along for the ride anymore. He was part of something real, something that was only just beginning. And for the first time, he was ready to see where it would take him. The night was still, the kind of silence that only came after a long day of work, when the world had settled into a rhythm all its own. Jack stood on the porch, his hands in his pockets, looking up at the sky. The stars were clear tonight, bright against the dark canvas of the night, the quiet hum of the evening air settling around him. It felt like everything was still, like he had finally reached a place where things didn't feel so heavy anymore. Vanessa was beside him, her gaze following his as she leaned against the railing. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. The weight of everything that had happened between them, the months of tension and uncertainty, hung between them like a thread that had finally been pulled taut. The garage, the shop, the dream. It had all come together in ways neither of them could have predicted. But it was more than just the success. It was the way they had done it together, the way they had rebuilt something that was never meant to be fixed. After a long moment, Vanessa finally spoke, her voice soft, almost tentative. "Do you ever think about how far we've come from where we started?" Jack smiled, his eyes still on the stars. "Every damn day." Vanessa laughed quietly, her voice a little shaky. "I didn't think we'd make it this far," she admitted, her gaze drifting from the sky to meet his. "But here we are." Jack turned toward her then, his heart heavy with something he hadn't quite been able to name until this moment. He stepped closer, closing the space between them, feeling the warmth of her body against his as he reached for her hand. "You've given me more than money, Vanessa," he said, his voice rough, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "You gave me back my life." Her breath hitched at his words, and for a moment neither of them moved. It was as if the weight of everything they'd been through, everything they had fought for, had finally settled into place. Vanessa's eyes softened, her gaze locking with his as she took a step closer, her breath shallow as she reached up to touch his face. The world felt like it had narrowed down to just the two of them, the quiet night, and the soft glow of the porch light casting shadows on their faces. And then, before Jack could say another word, she leaned in, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was soft at first, hesitant, as if both of them were finally allowing themselves to believe that this, whatever this was real. The kiss deepened, slow and steady, and for the first time in a long time, Jack let himself feel it, the peace, the relief, the sense that everything had finally fallen into place. Behind them, on the porch, a small voice broke the moment. "Took you long enough." They pulled apart, turning to find Lily standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her lips curving into a mischievous grin. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, and Jack couldn't help but laugh. "Go to bed, kid," Jack said, his voice filled with warmth, the tension of the past few months finally slipping away. But Lily only smiled wider, her eyes dancing with something like triumph. "Just glad you two figured it out," she said, before turning and disappearing back inside. Jack and Vanessa shared a quiet smile, their hands still intertwined as they looked up at the stars. They hadn't just built a business, a future. They had built something much more important, a life. And in that moment, Jack realized that everything he had ever wanted had always been right here, waiting for him to let it in.